Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
Earlier this year, my husband and I welcomed our first child, a beautiful baby girl we named Violet. She was perfect in every way with tiny fingers, the sweetest little cry, and these incredible blue eyes that seemed to see right through you. We were over the moon, finally parents, after years of trying. But life has a cruel way of changing everything in an instant. When Violet was just 3 months old, she passed away from sudden infant death syndrome. One morning, I went to check on her, and she was just gone. The doctor said there was nothing we could have done, that sometimes these things just happen, but that doesn't make it any easier to accept. The months that followed were a blur of grief counseling, medical bills, and trying to figure out how to keep living when your whole world has been shattered. My husband threw himself into work while I struggled to get out of bed most days. Eventually, I realized I needed something to focus on, so I went back to my job at the dental office. Working there serves its purpose. We open at 7 a.m. to accommodate people who need appointments before work or kids who come in before school. Getting up that early isn't fun on a good day, and these days I don't have many of those. But the routine helps, and my coworkers are understanding when I have rough patches. About 2 months ago, I decided to get a tattoo to honor Violet's memory. I chose a simple purple violet flower and had it done on my left arm where I could see it throughout the day. It's small and tasteful, nothing that would violate our office dress code. The tattoo artist did beautiful work, and every time I look at it, I feel like I'm carrying a piece of my daughter with me. I also have a small spaceship tattoo on my right arm that I got years ago just because I liked it. Neither tattoo is particularly obvious unless you're really looking, but they're visible if I'm wearing short sleeves. This morning started like any other. I arrived at the office a few minutes before 7, turned on the lights, and prepared for our first patient. Right at closing time yesterday, an elderly man had called, demanding an early morning appointment, claiming it was urgent. My colleague who took the call said he was pretty rude on the phone, but we squeezed him in anyway. At 6:58 a.m., this man walked through our door. I gave him my usual cheerful greeting, trying to muster energy despite the early hour. I asked how he was doing today with a bright smile. He responded in the gruffest, most dismissive tone possible, telling me he didn't want to be there. The way he said it was so hostile that it caught me off guard. I get that nobody loves going to the dentist, but his attitude was unnecessarily rude. I forced a smile and got him checked in while he stood there looking like I had personally ruined his day. Our dental assistant came out and brought him back for his appointment. I was actually relieved to have him out of the waiting area because his negative energy was already making my morning worse. The appointment went smoothly from what I could tell, and he was back at my desk shortly after 8 a.m. to check out and pay his balance. When I pulled up his account and started processing his payment, I noticed him staring at my arms. His eyes kept drifting to my tattoos, particularly the violet on my left arm. I'm used to people noticing them occasionally, but his stare was really intense and kind of uncomfortable. Then, without any warning, he pointed directly at my left arm. He asked what that crap was on my arm, using the rudest tone possible. I looked down at my violet tattoo, taken aback by both his rudeness and his choice of words. I told him it was a violet flower tattoo. Most people, even if they don't like tattoos, would just drop the subject after getting an answer. But this guy wasn't done. He demanded to know why I had that mess on my arm. The way he said mess made my blood start to boil. This tattoo means everything to me, and here's this stranger calling it crap and a mess. I could have given him some generic answer about liking flowers or just brushed off his question, but something about his tone and his complete lack of basic courtesy made me decide to tell him the truth. I looked him straight in the eye and told him it was for my infant daughter named Violet, who died at 3 months old in February. The change in his expression was immediate. His face went completely white and his mouth fell open slightly. For a moment, the only sound in the office was the hum of the fluorescent lights above us. He just stood there staring at me like he couldn't believe what I'd just said. Finally, he managed to mumble a weak apology. But even his sorry sounded half-hearted and awkward. He couldn't meet my eyes anymore and kept looking down at the floor. I finished processing his payment in silence while he shifted uncomfortably from foot to foot. The moment I handed him his receipt, he practically ran out of the office. He didn't say goodbye, didn't thank me for the service, just ducked his head and scurried out the door like he was escaping from something. After he left, I sat there for a moment processing what had just happened. Part of me felt bad for making him uncomfortable, but a bigger part of me felt satisfied. He had no right to call my tattoo crap or a mess, especially when he knew nothing about what it meant to me. The whole interaction reminded me that people need to think before they speak. You never know what someone else is going through or what significance something might have for them. This man saw my tattoo and immediately assumed it was just some frivolous decoration he could mock and judge. I've been through hell this year, losing the most important thing in my life and somehow finding a way to keep going. That tattoo isn't just ink on my skin, it's a memorial to my daughter, a way to keep her memory alive and close to my heart. For this stranger to call it crap and demand explanations was incredibly hurtful and completely out of line. But his reaction when I told him the truth was something to see. The way his arrogance crumbled and he couldn't get out of there fast enough almost made dealing with his rudeness worth it. I've been driving a hybrid for a couple of years now. When I first got it, I was living in a house with a garage where I could easily install a home charging station. Life was simple back then. My landlord decided to sell the house, and finding affordable housing in the city is basically impossible. I ended up in this cramped apartment complex where installing a personal charger wasn't even a discussion. The landlord flat out refused, and the electrical setup couldn't handle it anyway. So I became completely dependent on the public charging stations scattered around the city. At first, it wasn't too bad. The city had just rolled out this program with free charging ports in public parking lots. They put up clear signs that said, electric vehicles only because the charging cables only reach so far. If a gas car parks there, you literally can't plug in your car. The system worked pretty well for the first few months. Most people respected the signs, and if someone in a gas car parked there, you could call parking enforcement and get them towed. It felt fair and functional. Then the entitled drivers started showing up. And it was always the same type, someone driving an expensive electric car who thought they were special. They'd park in the charging spots without actually plugging in. They didn't need the electricity, but they figured their electric car gave them some kind of VIP parking privileges. There was nothing I could do about it. They technically followed the rule their car was electric, but they weren't using the charger, which meant I couldn't charge my car either. And since they weren't breaking any actual law, calling for a tow truck was pointless. This went on for months. I'd drive around looking for an available charging spot, finally find one according to my app, only to discover some entitled person had claimed it as their personal parking space. It made my daily routine a nightmare because I had to plan my entire schedule around hoping a charging spot would actually be available. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning. I was running low on battery and really needed to charge before work. My app showed one available spot at the shopping center near downtown. I drove over, waiting at the red light just before the parking lot, and watched the black car pull into the spot. The driver got out and walked away without even looking at the charging station. I pulled up and saw it was a brand new black car with expensive rims. The guy had walked straight toward the yoga studio at the corner of the shopping center. He was wearing those expensive workout clothes that scream, "I have money," and want everyone to know it. I sat in my car for about 20 minutes, getting more frustrated by the minute. My battery was getting lower, I was going to be late for work, and this guy was probably in there doing downward dog without a care in the world about the people he was screwing over. That's when I got an idea. I looked up the yoga studio online and called them. A cheerful woman answered and greeted me politely, asking how she could help. I told her there was something urgent she needed to know. I explained that someone in their current class drove a black car and gave her the license plate number. Then I said there was a tow truck there about to hook up their car for blocking a charging station. I told her they really needed to know right away or they were going to lose their car. The woman sounded shocked and genuinely grateful. She thanked me for calling and said she would get them right away. She acted like I was doing this guy a huge favor instead of plotting my petty revenge. I could hear her in the background interrupting the class. She was trying to be quiet about it, but yoga studios are pretty quiet places. I'm sure everyone heard her asking about the black car and reading out the license plate number. About 2 minutes later, I saw him come running out of the studio. He was still in his yoga outfit, looking panicked and angry. He rushed around the corner to check on his precious car, which was, of course, sitting there completely fine, with no tow truck in sight. He stood there for a moment looking confused and frustrated. I was parked a few spaces away, and I could see him looking around like he was trying to figure out what had happened. Eventually, he got back in his car and moved it to a regular parking spot. I pulled into the charging space and plugged in my car, feeling more satisfied than I had in months. But what happened next was even better. This guy had to go back into that yoga class knowing that everyone had heard his license plate announced. Everyone knew he was the person who had caused the interruption. In a yoga class, where people go for peace and zen, he was the guy who brought chaos and drama. I pictured him trying to get back into his meditation mindset, while everyone around him was probably wondering what kind of person parks illegally and almost gets their car towed. And knowing these entitled types, he was probably fuming the entire time about how someone had pranked him, completely missing the irony that he had created the whole situation himself. A few months later, the city figured out that drivers like this guy were ruining the whole system for everyone who actually needed to charge their cars. They replaced all the signs to read electric vehicles only while charging. Now, when someone parks in a charging spot without plugging in, I can call the cops and get them an actual ticket. It's not quite as satisfying as ruining someone's yoga session, but it's still pretty great. Running electronics stores for 15 years taught me that the best way to judge new employees is to see how they handle difficult customers when they think no one is watching. That's why I developed my little undercover test. I dress down, act like a regular customer, and see how new hires react when faced with unreasonable demands. It saved me from keeping terrible employees more times than I can count. 3 weeks ago, I hired Karen for our newest location downtown. Her resume looked decent enough and she interviewed well. She had retail experience and claimed she knew how to handle difficult situations professionally. I decided to give her a chance, but like always, I planned to do my little test after her first week. The store had been open for about 2 months, and we were still building our customer base. I made sure to staff it with experienced employees, but we needed one more person for the evening shift. That's where Karen came in. She seemed eager to work and promised she could handle any situation that came up. On the day of my test, I waited until Karen was working alone during the slower afternoon shift. I put on an old baseball cap, wore a wrinkled t-shirt, and drove my beat-up pickup truck instead of my usual car. I wanted to look like just another customer having a bad day. I walked into the store carrying a clearly broken tablet that looked like it had been dropped multiple times. The screen was completely shattered, and there was obvious water damage. I had bought it from a pawn shop specifically for tests like this. Karen was behind the counter scrolling through her phone when I approached. She barely looked up when I approached and asked to return the tablet. She asked if I had a receipt without even looking at the device. When I told her I had lost it but bought the tablet there last week and it stopped working, she finally looked at the tablet and rolled her eyes. Karen told me that the thing was completely destroyed and they couldn't take it back. I explained that I had paid good money for it, that it worked fine when I bought it, and now it was broken, so I wanted my money back. She pointed out that the tablet had obvious physical damage and said that even if I had a receipt, they wouldn't take it back in this condition. I decided to push a little harder, staying in character. I told her I didn't care about their policies because I was a paying customer who wanted a refund, and I demanded to speak to her manager. This is usually where good employees either calmly explain the return policy again or politely offer to call a manager. Karen did neither. Instead, she claimed that she was a manager today and told me no. She said the tablet was trashed and there was no way they were giving me money for it. She wasn't the manager, of course. I was testing to see if she'd lie to customers, and she failed that test too. I told her this was ridiculous and that I'd never been treated so poorly at a store before. Her response was to suggest that maybe I should shop somewhere else then. Her attitude was getting worse by the minute, but I decided to give her one more chance to handle the situation professionally. I said I understood they had policies, but surely there was something we could work out, like store credit or an exchange. Karen asked if I was deaf and repeated that she had said no. She told me to take my broken junk and get out of her store before she called security. At this point, I was ready to end the test. She had failed completely, showing rudeness, dishonesty, and zero customer service skills. But then things took a turn I never expected. I told her fine, I would take my business elsewhere, but she should know that treating customers like this wasn't going to help the store succeed. That's when Karen completely lost it. She came around from behind the counter, her face turning red. She said she was sick of entitled customers like me thinking we could walk in and make demands. She called me nothing but a broke loser trying to scam them. Before I could respond, she shoved me hard in the chest. I stumbled backward, completely shocked. I asked her what she was doing and told her she couldn't put her hands on customers. Karen shouted that she could do whatever she wanted because this was her store and I was trespassing now. I tried to back away toward the door, but she followed me, getting more aggressive. She yelled that I should run away like the pathetic scammer I was. When I turned to leave, she grabbed my shoulder and spun me around. Without any warning, she threw a punch that caught me right in the eye. The impact was so unexpected that I fell backward into a display rack. The pain was immediate and intense. I could feel my eye swelling shut already. Karen stood over me, breathing heavily, apparently proud of what she'd done. She said that maybe next time I would think twice before trying to rip off honest businesses. I slowly got to my feet, holding my eye. Blood was dripping from where her ring had cut the skin. I asked her if she had any idea what she had just done. Karen replied that she had defended her store from a scammer and told me to get out before she called the cops on me. I told her she had just assaulted her boss. The color drained from her face instantly. She said that was impossible because her boss was some rich guy who never came into the store. I walked behind the counter and pulled out my wallet, showing her my ID and business cards. I explained that I owned the store and the whole chain, and that I had been testing how she handled difficult customers, only to have her give me a black eye. Karen stared at the cards, then at me, then back at the cards. Her hands started shaking. She insisted this had to be a joke and accused me of lying. I picked up the store phone and called the police, speaking loud enough for her to hear me report an assault at my electronics store on 5th Street by an employee who had just punched me in the face. Karen started panicking, saying she had thought I was just some crazy customer and that she was defending the store. I asked her if lying about being a manager and assaulting someone was how she thought we trained our employees. The police arrived within 10 minutes. By then, my eye was completely swollen shut and the cut was still bleeding. Karen had spent the time alternating between apologizing frantically and trying to justify her actions. The officer asked me to explain what had happened. I told the whole story while Karen stood there getting paler by the minute. The security cameras had caught everything, so there was no disputing what had occurred. The officer told Karen he was placing her under arrest for assault and began reading her rights. When they put the handcuffs on Karen, she started crying and begging. She pleaded that she needed this job and had bills to pay, claiming it was all a misunderstanding. I told her that assaulting customers wasn't a misunderstanding but a crime. The officer led her out to the patrol car while she continued pleading. I locked up the store and drove to the hospital to get my eye checked out. The doctor said I'd have a black eye for about 2 weeks, but there was no permanent damage. The next morning I called Karen to officially terminate her employment. She answered on the first ring. She immediately begged for another chance and said she would do anything to make things right. I told her that punching your boss in the face was something you couldn't come back from. Karen protested that she hadn't known it was me and thought she was protecting the store. I explained that even if I had been just a regular customer, what she did was completely unacceptable. No employee should ever put their hands on someone, let alone punch them. I hung up and blocked her number. A few days later, I heard she'd been charged with assault and battery. She ended up pleading guilty. I mean, if she had just handled the situation professionally from the start, she would have passed the test with flying colors. All she had to do was be polite, explain our return policy clearly, and offer to get a manager if I insisted. Instead, she chose to lie, be rude, and ultimately commit assault. This happened about 5 years ago when I was going through a rough patch financially. My dad had just passed away and left me his house, but I couldn't afford to keep up with both my mortgage and his property taxes. Instead of selling it right away, I decided to rent it out to help cover the costs while I figured out what to do long term. The house was actually pretty nice. 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, updated kitchen, decent neighborhood. My dad had taken good care of it over the years. I spent weeks getting it ready for renters. Fresh coat of white paint throughout, deep cleaning, minor repairs. I even replaced a few old fixtures to make it more appealing. I posted the listing online and got tons of interest. The rental market was pretty competitive in my area, so I scheduled multiple showings over the weekend. Most of the people who came by were normal, young couples, small families, a few graduate students. Everyone seemed respectful and asked reasonable questions about lease terms and move-in dates. Then came the last showing of the day. I was already tired from showing the house 6 times when this family pulled up. A woman got out of the driver's seat, followed by a man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, and 3 teenage boys who immediately started roughhousing in the front yard. The woman walked up to me with this expectant look on her face, like I should already know who she was. She asked if I was the owner and confirmed they were here for the 4 o'clock showing. I told her yes and invited them inside. The moment we stepped inside, chaos erupted. The 3 boys started running through the house like it was a playground, shouting and chasing each other. One of them slid across the hardwood floors in his socks, while the other 2 were playing some kind of tag game that involved jumping over furniture. I kept looking nervously at my dad's old lamp in the living room and the glass coffee table, praying nothing would get broken. The husband just stood there looking embarrassed, while Karen acted like this was completely normal behavior. I began showing them the main living area and pointed out the kitchen. I mentioned that upstairs we had all 4 bedrooms. Karen immediately said the walls were too stark and had a very cold feeling. I ignored her complaint and continued the tour. Upstairs, the boys were still running around, now playing what looked like hide and seek in the closets. One of them was jumping on the bed in the master bedroom. I showed her the master suite with its own bathroom, then walked down the hallway to show the remaining bedrooms and the shared bathroom between 2 of them. Karen suddenly stopped and said she thought I had told her it had 4 bedrooms. I confirmed that it did have 4, but then she complained that only 2 had a private bathroom and the other 2 had to share one. She said her guys didn't like to share. I looked at her boys who were currently fighting over who got to flush the toilet in the shared bathroom. One of them was making gross sound effects while the other 2 laughed hysterically. I just said okay, and that this was how the house was laid out. Then Karen told me I would need to repaint to a more calming color. She also pointed out that the flooring in the kitchen was cracked. I had literally just painted every single room white 2 weeks ago. The kitchen floor had one tiny crack in one tile that was barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. I explained that the entire inside had just been painted white and there was only one cracked tile. I suggested that maybe this house wasn't for her, but Karen said no, they would take it. She said I would just have to make some changes for it to fit their needs. I stared at her for a moment, wondering if I'd heard correctly. Her husband was now chasing one of their sons who was trying to climb onto the kitchen counters. I asked what changes she meant exactly. Karen explained that obviously the paint needed to be something more soothing, maybe a nice sage green or lavender. She said the kitchen floor needed to be completely redone because she couldn't have her family walking on cracked tiles. And I would need to add another bathroom upstairs so her boys each had their own space. She wanted me to repaint the entire house, redo the kitchen floor, and somehow magically add a 4th bathroom. Karen continued, saying the backyard needed better fencing too. She claimed the current fence was too low and her boys needed privacy when they were outside. I told her that I wasn't making any renovations to this property and that I was renting it as is. But Karen insisted they really wanted this house and called me unreasonable. She said these were basic modifications any decent landlord would make for good tenants. At that moment, one of her sons came running down the stairs, making airplane noises with his arms spread wide, nearly knocking over a plant I placed by the window. Karen announced they could move in next weekend and asked if I would have everything finished by then. I repeated that I wasn't doing any renovations and the house was available as it currently was. Karen then said fine, they would just do the work themselves and I could reimburse them. She mentioned her husband was handy with tools. I looked at her husband, who was now trying to get their youngest son to stop licking the refrigerator. I told her absolutely not. I explained that she couldn't make modifications to a rental property without permission, and I wasn't giving permission. Karen called me completely unreasonable. She said they were offering to rent my house and I was being difficult about simple requests. She asked if I knew how hard it was to find a place that fits their family's needs. I told her there were other applicants interested in renting the house exactly as it is. Karen responded that those other people clearly didn't have standards. She said she would tell me what, they would overlook the paint issue if I at least fixed that disgusting cracked tile and added the extra bathroom. I'd had enough. Her kids were now in the living room seeing who could slide the furthest across the floor, and I was genuinely worried about my dad's belongings getting damaged. I told her I thought we were done here, and this house wasn't going to work for her family. Karen asked excuse me and said we hadn't even discussed rent yet. I told her we wouldn't be discussing rent because I wasn't renting to her. Karen accused me of discriminating against them because they had children. I explained I wasn't discriminating but choosing not to rent to tenants who expected me to renovate my property to their specifications. Karen called this ridiculous and claimed they were perfect tenants. She said her boys were angels. Right on cue, one of her angels came running through the kitchen chasing his brother with what looked like a butter knife he'd found in one of the drawers. I told them I needed them to leave now. Karen said fine and complained that my house was overpriced anyway. She claimed the neighborhood was going downhill and the kitchen was outdated. She said I would never find decent renters with my attitude. She stormed out, yelling at her family to get in the car. The husband mumbled an apology as he herded the boys outside. I watched from the window as she continued ranting in the driveway for another 5 minutes before finally driving away. I'm a 28-year-old new mom with a 6-month-old baby boy. My husband and I have been dealing with the usual baby challenges, including our little one's habit of grabbing everything within reach. Glasses, phones, hair, nothing is safe when he gets excited. We're working on it, but he's only 6 months old, so it's a process. I met Karen back in college. We were decent friends then, but over the years she's become increasingly entitled and materialistic. Everything she owns has to be expensive, and she loves showing off her purchases. She works in marketing and makes good money, which she spends freely on luxury items. Despite her attitude getting worse over time, I still considered her a friend and wanted to maintain the relationship. Last Tuesday, Karen sent me a text message saying she wanted to come visit and meet the baby. I was excited to show him off since he's my first child, and I'm still in that phase where I want everyone to see how amazing he is. We arranged for her to come over that afternoon. When she arrived, she was wearing her usual fancy outfit. I recognized her sunglasses immediately since she'd posted about them on social media when she bought them, bragging about how they cost almost 800 pounds. She was also carrying the latest iPhone, the new model that just came out. After we caught up for a bit, she asked to hold the baby. I was happy to let her, but I gave her the same warning I give everyone. I told her that he loves grabbing things and suggested she might want to take those sunglasses off her head because he would definitely go for them. I also warned her to watch her phone too. She rolled her eyes and accused me of being an overprotective mom. She said I was hogging my own baby. I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment, but I tried again. I explained that I wasn't being overprotective and that I was just warning her because it happens every time. I told her he's really quick with his hands. She dismissed my concerns and insisted that she could handle a baby. I exchanged a look with my husband, who just shrugged. He knew I'd done my part by warning her. I carefully handed over my son, and Karen cooed at him while he looked up at her with his big, curious eyes. Everything seemed fine for about 2 minutes. Then Karen decided she wanted to take a selfie. I told her that was okay, but asked her not to post it anywhere because we weren't ready for his photos to be online yet. She brushed off my request and said it was just for her. She held him with one arm and pulled out her expensive phone with the other, angling it to get both of them in the shot. The moment that phone appeared, my son's face lit up with excitement. His little hands immediately reached for the closest shiny object, her sunglasses. His tiny fingers wrapped around the frames, and he got that thrilled expression he always gets when he successfully grabs something. Then came the arm waving. He was so proud of his catch that he started flailing his arms around. In celebration, the sunglasses went flying across the room. Karen let out an ear-piercing scream that made my son jump in terror. His face crumpled and he started crying, but worse than that, he got startled and threw his arms out wildly. His little fist connected with her phone, sending it clattering to the hardwood floor. I immediately stepped forward and took my crying baby from her arms, bouncing him gently to calm him down. I whispered soft words to comfort him and told him he was okay. While I focused on comforting my son, Karen was having a complete meltdown. She rushed to pick up her phone, which had a spiderweb crack across the entire screen. Then she went to examine her sunglasses, which had landed near the couch. One of the arms was bent at an odd angle. Karen shouted about what he had done and complained about the damage, saying her phone was completely ruined. I said sorry that it happened, but reminded her that I had warned her twice about this exact thing. She said that wasn't the point and demanded that I replace her items immediately. She asked if I had any idea how much they cost. My husband finally spoke up from where he'd been watching the whole scene unfold. He reminded her that I had told her this would happen, and that she had said she could handle it. Karen ignored him and turned back to me. She demanded that I buy her a new iPhone and replace her sunglasses, saying the total cost was £2,300. I felt my jaw drop. £2,300 was more than I made in a month before going on maternity leave. Even with my husband's income, that was a huge amount of money for us, especially with a new baby and all the expenses that come with that. I explained that we couldn't pay that amount because it wasn't even my monthly wage, and I was on maternity leave. I also said I didn't feel like I should have to pay when I had warned her this would happen. Karen called me heartless and asked if I couldn't see how upset she was. She said those were her favorite sunglasses. I told her I understood she was upset, but reminded her that she had chosen to ignore my warnings twice. She said she couldn't believe I was being so selfish, and called me a terrible friend. She continued ranting about how expensive everything was and how we were responsible for replacing her things. I just held my son closer, still trying to calm him down from her screaming. My husband stood there with his arms crossed, clearly done with the whole situation. My husband had enough. He told her that she had been warned multiple times and had said she could handle it. He said this was on her. Karen said that she wasn't leaving until we agreed to pay for the damages. That's when I remembered something. Karen had been bragging on social media just a week before about her promotion at work and the huge bonus she'd received. She'd posted photos of herself at an expensive restaurant celebrating. I brought up how she had just posted about her big promotion and bonus the week before and said I was sure she could afford to replace her own things. Karen's face turned red. She insisted that was completely different because that money was for her savings. I told her that our money was for our baby and our household. I explained that I had warned her what would happen, she had ignored me, and now she wanted us to pay for her choice. I said that wasn't how it worked. The argument went on for another 10 minutes, with Karen becoming increasingly dramatic about her ruined possessions. She stormed out, declaring that our friendship was over and that she'd never forgive us for being so callous. My husband and I looked at each other after she left. He said that went exactly as expected. I told him I felt bad that her things got broken, but I really had warned her. He agreed that I had warned her twice and that she had made her choice. The next day, I got a text from a mutual friend asking if I'd really refused to pay for Karen's broken items. Karen had been calling everyone we knew, trying to get them on her side. When our friend heard the full story, including the part about me warning Karen twice, she said Karen was being ridiculous and that she wouldn't have paid either. A few days later, I saw Karen had posted on social media about getting her phone screen repaired for £60 and finding a similar pair of sunglasses on sale for £200. So much for the £2,300 she demanded from us. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.